Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's 1 o'clock. My name's Gavin May. I'm the head of sales here at Trident, and I'm just filling the next 5 minutes or so whilst we wait for everybody to sort of jump online. Hopefully, you've all got your Uber Eats vouchers, and you've got something tasty in front of you that you can eat and enjoy your lunch. We ran this event about 3 weeks ago, and it was a great event. We ran it for education, and we got some absolutely fantastic feedback. And we will be doing a survey after this. So, please jump online when we send out an email that gives you the ability to put in your feedback. We'd really appreciate that. We had at that education one, we had Graham Samuel present, and look, it was really interesting what he had to say. I'm really looking forward to hearing what he has to say 3 weeks afterwards, and how the economy has changed and we've adapted to COVID-19. But I think one of the things that he said was that organisations that adapt are the ones that are going to survive in this post-COVID landscape. And I think I was sort of seeing that we're seeing companies and organisations sink, swim or fly. And by that, what I mean is some of the companies that have done really well and have innovated and have adapted are actually seeing their sales and their growth, exceed expectations. So that's a really positive thing. I was on an Aruba event yesterday. Now, normally this is an event that they run every year, and they go to different countries in Asia Pac. They've done Bangkok, and they've done Macau, and last year was Sydney. This year, obviously, we can't go anywhere, and so they ran that as a virtual event. And normally they have about 2,500 people attend this event that they have. This time they had a reach of 30,000. So for them, that's actually something that's worked really, really well for them. They had a great Zoom session, and it was a mix of pre-recorded and live sessions that they did. Now, they had James Corden come on and do a little bit of an intro. For some of you who don't know James Corden, he's the presenter of the Late Late Show in the UK. He's a funny, chubby English man, and we sort of looked to see if we could get him for this. Unfortunately, our budget didn't quite stretch, and we've only managed to get 2 out of those, just a chubby English man to kick it off. We also had an astronaut presenting, and that was really interesting what he spoke about. But what we've got today is we've got 3 great keynote speakers who are out of this world, and really looking forward to hearing what they've got to say. I've built you up now. The session is very interactive. We want to hear your questions. Now, down below here in the Zoom meeting, you'll see a Q&A section there. Please pump in your questions there. Jeff will be the MC, and he's going to run through those questions and pass them through to the speakers as and when there's a little pause. And as we did this with Graham 3 weeks ago, it was very good. Graham will sometimes say, hey, I'm going to cover that in a couple of minutes. So we'll work on that with you, but we do want it to be interactive, so we do want to see your questions coming through. Just before we just get started, and when we talk about innovative solutions and products, we are seeing as well in the health and education, which is the main areas that we work in, we are seeing a lot of requirements now for temperature sensing solutions. We've seen lots come through, from standalone to just thermometers to fully integrated sign-in solutions with cameras and dotted around campuses or facilities, etc. So we're going to be coming out with something about that in the next few week or so, because we've sort of probably taken our time a little bit just to make sure that we can see a product that is going to fit nicely into our markets. So I think we've got most are online now. So I'm going to hand us over to our Chief Sales Officer, Jeff Bentley, and he will be the MC for this afternoon's event. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Gavin, and welcome everyone. Welcome to our first online health forum. And whilst it's not super normal or View to Mont, where we normally have these functions, it is a hell of a lot cheaper. So enjoy your Uber Eats and as we start getting back to our normal routines, we'll all have you back at one of our favourite venues very shortly. Well, isn't there a buzz around the place? Footy is back. Footy's back in town. To all the Richmond supporters, congratulations on getting your first draw for the season. But what we will do, we'll move straight into it. So instead of going straight to it, we're going to start with a game. Everyone's telling me I'm shouting. Can you hear me? Okay. We have three great speakers. We have Graham Samuel, Professor Graham Samuel, AC. We have Marie McCabe from Dementia Australia, and we've got Graham Croft from Signature Care and Croft Developments. Question one. Whoever gets these questions correctly, you need to send it straight to me, will receive a fine bottle of wine. Which one of our notable speakers was once the AFL Commissioner? Correct, Craig Holland, well done. Which one of our notable speakers is actually a New Zealander? No one got that one? Okay, it is actually Graham Croft. Well done, Crofty. Which one of our notable speakers has a very demanding chairman? Yeah, you can't answer that, Marie, or you can't answer that either, Graham. And that is, yes, Marie got it. Okay, anyway, a bit of fun. Okay, let's start into it. Now, as what Gavin mentioned before, we did have this forum about 3 weeks ago where Graham spoke about how he feels we'll come out of this pandemic from an optimistic view, and it was very encouraging. It was delightful to hear. So I will officially start the process off and introducing Graham Samuel on a formal basis. Graham, as we know, is an extremely successful businessman. He was the chairman of ACCC for many years. He's the chairman of Dementia Australia. He recently was on the committee to do the governance on the CBA review. He is basically everywhere. If you print out Wikipedia and I gave you Graham's full resume, we'd have to cut short. We'd be at 1:30. So I will pass over to Graham. And Graham, it's over to you. We do want to make it very interactive, everyone. And when you ask the question, I will try and pick the right time where Graham to throw that to you and make it as interactive as possible. So, Graham, thanks so much. Over to you.
Thanks, Jeff. And look, welcome everyone. Thanks for coming on board for lunch. I didn't get my voucher, by the way, so if I get a bit irritable, it's because I'm hungry. Let me say this, and I don't, as Marie will attest, I don't often say I told you so, but 2 months ago, I gave a speech to Brighton Rotary on the sort of where we're at and where things were going. And I said 2 things. The first was that, in my view, the health issues had been remarkably well handled by the National Cabinet, and that put a lie and a nonsense to some of the doomsayers that were out there. And in particular, I'll name them, 2 of them. They came to the ABC. One is the oft referred to as the technical expert who knows all about this, and that is Norman Swan. And the other one was Bill Botel. They were both fundamentally wrong. They were predicting deaths of up to 150,000 in Australia, or 50,000 on a best case basis. I think we got 104, actually. 104 tragic losses, but nothing like the 50 or 100,000. And some of the predictions as to what might happen were fundamentally wrong, and some of the prescriptions, this is a more important element, some of the prescriptions that they had as to how to avoid this disaster scenario in terms of total lockdowns. And Bill Botel was very, very angry with the government that it didn't go into a total lockdown, because after all, he was expert in this, in having been advising on the HIV situation earlier this century. Well, fortunately, they've been relegated to the background. Swan comes out every now and then and says a few things, but I think for the most part, people have said they got it wrong, and the National Cabinet got it right. And that was really, really important in terms of our economic position. And so economically, the federal government, with the supporting part of the National Cabinet, put in place a range of economic prescriptions which were staged, which have turned out to be absolutely correct, and I'll explain why just in a moment. Yes, there was an overestimate of the JobKeeper, or those who were going to JobKeeper. That was not a blunder, it was not a mistake. It was, frankly, it was Treasury, and Steve Kennedy of Treasury, the Secretary of Treasury, has accepted full responsibility for this. He said, look, I'm given a best case and I'm given a worst case. What am I going to do? Tell government to go with the best case and then find it's a mistake and they're going to have to revise all their numbers. So he said, I gave them the worst and the best case. The government properly and conservatively took the worst case and budgeted on that on the basis that they knew at least if, as Scott Morrison said subsequently, if there was something where they'd erred at all, it was erring on the right side of the line, so that, as it turned out, they were far too conservative to JobKeeper. Instead of 6.5 million people going onto JobKeeper, it's something like 3.5 million. And the result is that there is $60 to $70 billion of funds, $60 billion of funds that have not been necessary to borrow to be able to maintain that. And then you've got people out there that are saying, you've got to keep JobKeeper going. And what Frydenberg and Morrison are saying is, look, just hold your horses, people. Let's just wait and see what we need, when we need it, where it's going to be needed. And we will look at targeted assistance. It may be restricted or confined JobKeeper extensions. There's a review of JobKeeper due out at the end of this month. It may be that there will be a switch from JobKeeper to JobSeeker and Newstart and increases there. It may be certain sectors, and they've already talked about one sector, which is the building sector. Will get its own targeted assistance. So it's an adjustment that's constantly occurring. And for those that are out there calling for things to be done, I have to say to you, I think that they are in many cases vested interest, but in certain other cases, what they are is very superficial analysis. And so my first proposition to you is to say, health-wise, the National Cabinet has proven its value, as have the combined medical health officers, senior medical health officers around the country. They've proven themselves to be correct, and we're certainly amongst the 5 leading nations in the world in the way that we've handled this pandemic. Ranking alongside probably one of the leading nations, New Zealand, and South Korea and Taiwan. And we ought to be very thankful that we're there. I actually read the papers in the morning, including the Wall Street Journal and the London Times and the New York Times, and I think to myself, oh, how lucky we are to be in Australia compared to some of the other nations in the world. So that's item 1. Item 2, economically, it looks like we are on the right track, and that's what I tried to say a couple of months ago. I was optimistic as to where we might go. We had an economic downturn, if you like, or a contraction in the first 3 months of the year. That was the March quarter of 0.3%. Now, I mean, that is so marginal, it doesn't matter. And it is, yes, it's a contraction, and yes, unemployment goes with it, but it's a very small contraction compared to many other nations throughout the world. And again, we can be very thankful for the way that the economy has been managed through this whole process. Interestingly, back a couple of months ago when we were talking about unemployment, I said, well, look, the predictions at that stage from the Reserve Bank on the best case was that unemployment would peak in the September quarter at 10% and then would move back to around 7% next year. And I compared that with the recession we had to have in 1990, which peaked at 11.2% and took 3 years to go back to 8.3%. And then we've had other recessions back in the 80s and the like, all of which have been a lot longer. Now, very interestingly, and by the way, that was the Reserve Bank's analysis, but now Treasury have come out and said, Steve Kennedy before the Senate committee the other day said, actually, we've revised our forecast again. We don't think that the unemployment will peak at 10%. We think it'll probably peak at about 8%, and that will pull it down next year to 6.5% or thereabouts. 6.5% unemployment. Yes, every single person unemployed is a tragedy, but we've got to remember 6.5% compares to the peak unemployment or the lowest or the trough unemployment figures that we had before all this broke out, which is about 5.2%. So we are doing remarkably well. Now, what will cause the problems? And I think there are three or four things. The first will be, and these are inevitable, I have to say, unfortunately, they're inevitable. A second wave, and there will be a second wave, but fortunately it'll be more localized. And, you know, we've got, look, forgive me, and I know this will cause a bit of angst amongst a few people around the table, but these people that went out over the weekend in the mass demonstrations, you know, sort of catch up on Black Lives Matter. Yes, Black lives do matter. They are fundamentally important, but can we please not also think of the rest of Australia and both the health and the economic conditions that are associated with the potentials for another wave of coronavirus infections coming from mass gatherings such as, you know, occurred over the weekend, and such as is contemplated again tonight and is contemplated again tomorrow. We've got a rally up in Queensland in respect of refugees, and I was listening to the proponent of that, or the organiser of that, this morning on ABC Breakfast, and Michael Rowland was tackling him on the sense or the lack of sense of that rally. And, you know, the defence was just, it was just so sort of self-focused. No, I'm going to do this, and yeah, we'll do our best to keep things safe, etc. And, you know, it just, so all those things bewilder me that that's happening. Item one. But the government is taking every steps it can to protect us from that, particularly by keeping international borders closed, and that's going to be very important because that's where a lot of the infection will be coming. Item one. Item two is going to be, I think, the states continuing to regard themselves as living in 1900 rather than 2020. 1900 was before we had federation, and, you know, I'm just bewildered that state premiers, in the interests of their forthcoming elections, continue to keep borders shut on the basis that we will protect the people that are north of Tweed Heads, or protect the people that are you know, west of the Nullarbor or whatever it is, from the potential for infection from those dastardly New South Welshmen, Victorians and ACT residents. Something's wrong. You know, these people don't have any common sense, in my view, the leaders of these states, and they're going to be the second problem because they will restrain and constrain economic recovery. And we're seeing, and I'll say this in your presence, Graham, because you're a former New Zealander, but at least we're seeing some common sense coming out of Jacinda Ardern and out of the southeast states of Victoria, of Australia, in trying to deal with that. That's number two. Number three, a little while ago, you won't remember this, but I'll never forget it. In the Australian newspaper, there was a headline. It was called Echoes of the Great Depression, the capital G&D. And it was a photograph of the Centrelink queues. Echoes of the Great Depression, right? That would have put the scare up anyone. And then down the bottom of the page was one of those bold letter promos of an article by Dennis Shanahan inside the paper, which said, the biggest economic risk we face is panic and fear instilled by media hyperbole and exaggeration. Well, the subeditor didn't actually pick up the irony that on that same page, we had Echoes of the Great Depression headlined at the top of the page, as the journalist down below was saying, the real problem is panic and fear. Now, that is a problem. And the media love to exaggerate, not exaggerate, but to headline you know, all the things that might cause gloom and doom and despair and panic and fear. And so when Frydenberg the other day said, yes, we are in recession. Well, that's all the papers needed, was the big R word, the recession word, right? And scares people. And we've got to remember this, that this is not a recession in the normal form. A recession is one that's normally demand driven. What happens is that you have, we went through this decade after decade. We have a boom in the share market, boom in the real estate market, people borrow an awful lot, then interest rates go up, and they went up in the recession we had to have 1990 to 93 or thereabouts. They went up to 17%. Suddenly there's a major contraction because business suddenly has to pull its head in. Consumers get frightened, consumers stop demanding goods. That causes production to slow down, that causes unemployment. As unemployment rises, consumers get even more concerned and they therefore demand less goods, and you go into a cycle of downturn. That's not what happened here. What happened here was we had a contraction induced by government because of the COVID-19 situation, and government pulled a lever to close off supply. So it was a supply contraction rather than a demand-led recession, the normal one. And what government has now done is to push the lever back the other way to bring back supply into the process. Interestingly, the statistics are showing that the consumer confidence now is almost back to pre-COVID levels, which is remarkable. And yeah, you'd have to say the government clearly has done something right to have that occur. The share market now is back to, was yesterday anyway, up around 6,000 compared to its peak in January or February this year of 7,000. So that's about a 15.5%, 16% drop. And that's a remarkable recovery on the share market. The share market might be wrong, but you know, there's an awful lot of investors that seem to have formed a view that things are looking all right in terms of the Australian recovery. The Australian dollar is sitting about 70 cents, 71 cents at the moment, compared to its low, which was 55 cents. That again reflects both the weakness in the US dollar, but also strength in the Australian dollar. So things are looking pretty good as far as that's concerned. The other thing that is a real problem, and I think it's got to be knocked on the head as hard as we can. I was sitting with a very senior company director the other day and the editor of one of our daily newspapers, and we were having a bite to eat. Uber Eats it was. We were together around a table, and she said to me, she said, I think we're heading for I called a September cliff. I said, what do you mean? She said, oh, as things are withdrawn in September, support's withdrawn, we'll go over a cliff into a major economic decline. And I said, I think you're wrong. And I think you mistake government's judgment and government's ability to understand that it won't suddenly close off the support, but it will redirect it, as I think I said in my opening comments, to the areas that matter. And I don't think the cliff will exist. But if too many corporate leaders, and she said she's spoken to a number of them, if too many corporate leaders talk about the cliff, it could become a self-fulfilling prophecy. And that, I think, is a risk. The only longer term issue I think we have to deal with, and this is going to bring my final comments, Jeff, is this. We're into a whole new paradigm as far as business is concerned. Business is not going to be the same. Whether it be the reduced use of offices in the formal sense of the word. A major law firm in the city of Melbourne, I was talking to the senior partner the other day, and he said they're about to shift into new premises. They have handed back 20% of the office space they're going to take, not because they're contracting their workforce. He said, we're now actually catering on office space that will be less than what we need for the whole of our workforce. Because he said, we're working on the basis that people now will work at home, they'll work in clients' offices, they may even work in those sorts of offices like WeWork and Surfcorp have got, you know, out in the suburbs and not be coming into the city as much. So that's issue number one. I don't know about you guys. Before this all started, I was traveling all over Australia for a review I'm doing for the federal government. And I was traveling sometimes non-stop 10 days, non-stop, but certainly 4 or 5 days a week doing upwards of 8 or 9 flights. And it was exhausting, but also time consuming and everything else. And I love this Zoom. I love working at home. It is so much more productive, you know, you can do so much more, and you know you can adapt to it. Now I know we've got all these psychologists that are out there saying, now we'll show you how you can adapt to living at home, and yeah, people talking about domestic violence has increased. The police have said that hasn't in terms of complaints that have come their way, but you know, separations and divorces have increased, and all this sort of stuff, and how you've got to adapt to having your children at home and not having them at home, and they'll have to adapt to going back to school. I've got a young one who's gone back to school, and the only thing he's adapting to is not playing those computer games quite as much. But look, we are going into a new world, I think, where we're suddenly, in a quantum leap, being pushed into use of technology. And technology was going to be coming slowly and surely, but I think now it's going to come to us with a big rush. And Maria will talk a bit about that in terms of dementia care and the like, but it's the way we do things. I was talking to Maria the other day about some of the forums that we have, you know, and we gather 500 people, 600 people, 1,000 people up at the exhibition centre in the convention centre in Melbourne. And it's very expensive, and they've all got to come there, and they've got to park there and everything else. And it's a really expensive way. And I said, Marie, we've seen now a whole range of online forums where we communicate. The AFR, I did one with Banking and Wealth Summit the other day, 600 participants. and it was conducted out of a very, very small office up at Deloitte's. They ran a video thing up there, and I did mine by Zoom. And they got to 600 participants. I'm thinking, well, that must have cost 1/10 of what it would have cost to actually have this in a hotel. And they actually got twice the number of participants they would have normally got. So I think technology is going to really now move much more into the way we do things. That will provide, I think, a more productive process. It doesn't mean, by the way, in terms of manufacturing, this is my final comment, that we'll start making cars again in Australia. If we do, you will not be employing 50,000 workers. You'll employ a few workers that are highly skilled in managing robotics, and we'll have robotically produced cars, such as you can see in England and elsewhere, where cars, so if people are thinking that we're going to suddenly have a manufacturing industry, Kim Carr's the opposition spokesperson, we're going to have a manufacturing industry, we'll subsidise with 50,000 workers. I just don't think they understand the same way Donald Trump didn't understand when he said, I'll make America great again, and I'm going to have manufacturing restarted in this country by putting in tariffs. And I think he fundamentally either didn't know or thought he could con people into believing that it was cheap imported Chinese goods that were causing the problem, rather than it was technology that was causing people to cease to have their standard form of work, whether it was process making shoes or textiles or cars or whatever it might be. So very optimistic I am, but there are the risks that I think we face. And I think the risks are very real.
Thanks, Graham. Just letting everyone, please make this as interactive. Send us as many questions as you have. Graham, I do have one question. Could you touch on, during this crisis or pandemic, who demonstrated really good leadership qualities?
During the, well, I can say now, I think at federal government level, Morrison, Frydenberg, Greg Hunt, amazing what he did as health minister, absolutely amazing. And Brenda Murphy as the chief medical officer, soon to be the secretary of the Department of Health. Those four led the charge there brilliantly. The state premiers did it as well, with some variations, I have to say. And I'm not going to get into sort of niggling about some of the things that occurred. There were issues there about slowness in. Actually, it wasn't slowness in opening up again. It was more slowness in announcing opening up. You tended to think that was someone that was focusing more on the media, sort of advantage of making an announcement on a Monday rather than on a Friday and all those sort of things. But that's gone really well. Some of those state premiers is a bit of a taser gun at the moment to get them moving on opening up borders. And I think it's been very interesting to see what's happened with the Queensland Premier, where she, by slip of the tongue, announced that she wouldn't be opening up Queensland's borders until at least September, if not later. And now she's talking about, she's on the same page as the Prime Minister. And of course, she's talking about the 10th of July, which is a very, very nice slip and slide, but it doesn't matter. At least we can get the borders open, get people moving around the country again. That'll help aviation and things of that nature. So that's where we've had some really good leadership. And there's been some really good leadership in some of the newspapers from a couple of the journalists. I can give you too many of them, Jeff, that I think have been really poor in the process. And they deserve to be called out for what they are.
Okay, great.
And
Thanks.
Maria said to me here, she's not sure Julia's loving me working at home. She is, because she's going out most of the time.
Did you want to respond to that, Marie?
No, she dug a hole deep enough. That's all right.
As you can see, Marie and Graham have a fairly good relationship, I think.
And see, it's very interesting. National Cabinet has just announced a green light for 10,000 people crowds, which will suit the NRL because they never get more than that, but the AFL will find it fairly restrictive. But so hosting up to 10,000 ticketed spectators by July. So, the government, the National Cabinet is getting it right. And once these things start to open up, it won't be long before, if we're sensible, things will start to get back to normal. And I think you'll be amazed how quickly the economy will recover. Notice Steve Kennedy, Secretary of Treasury, said before the Senate committee the other day, I'm not fixing firm on 8%. I may well revise that down a bit lower as the economy opens up. And they're terribly anxious to see the economy open up again. And that's the beauty of what this contraction is about. It's one where government can pull the levers to turn the supply tap back on.
Okay, Graham, I do have a couple of questions. Can you, in relation to Virgin Airlines, they were in trouble pre-C19. How do you think this will play out?
Well, there's two or three comments on that. First of all, I should mention that I'm chairman of Airlines for Australia and New Zealand, which is Virgin, Qantas, Rex, and Air New Zealand. But in respect of Virgin, I'll say, I'll go out on a limb. I'll say, one, they will revive. Two, it'll be new owners. Three, the existing owners will get nothing. And they had their chance to back it up, but they didn't, so they'll get nothing out of it. The bondholders and the secure bondholders will take a haircut. How much, I'm just not sure at the moment, but Virgin will resuscitate for a very good reason, and that is a far better deal for the bondholders than a liquidation. We'll end up getting nothing. When it does revive, there will be, look, travel is going to be slow to take up again for the reasons I've described in terms of technology and the like. Domestic travel, particularly in terms of non-tourist, that is business travel, will be a bit slower to take up, and international travel will be a lot longer to open up, because it won't be Australia will be the problem, it'll be the rest of the world. And I don't think we want to be importing what the rest of the world's got. And I'm not sure how many of you would be anxious to go to Italy or Spain or England at the present time, or the United States, frankly, but that may change next January if we have a new president. That's a political statement. But the Virgin will revive, and it looks like it'll revive under the stewardship of Paul Scurrah, the CEO. I have to say to you, having worked with Paul, I think he's an outstanding CEO, and that what COVID has done is, and this voluntary administration, is give him the chance to bring about a restructure urgently that he was having to do a lot more slowly, as CEO of an ongoing airline. So I think all those things are operating in its favour. So COVID's been bad news in one respect, but in another respect, it's probably good news. It's given the chance for it to revive as a restructured, enterprise. Whether it's still called Virgin will depend upon what deal they negotiate, if anything, with Branson.
Okay, great. You did touch on the Black Lives Matter rally, Graham. Yeah. How was that handled by Dan Andrews, and what could have been done better, you think?
Look, it's easy to say that Dan Andrews and others should have taken a tougher approach. The problem is, I'm not sure what they could have done. You could have brought out the whole of the police force and not stopped it, and you'd have ended up with riot squads and a massive amount of damage and everything else. Andrews came out. Now, see, some people, I was reading the Australian this morning, say that he turned a blind eye to the activists. I don't think that's right. He actually said, I really am telling you, don't go. I wish you wouldn't go. Please don't go. The one that deserves a bit of a kick in the head is Steve Marshall over in South Australia, where it wasn't him, it was his police commissioner there who exempted that rally from the non-gathering laws, and that was a mistake. You don't exempt them. And what Dan Andrews, I think, did was to say, I'm asking you, I'm pleading with you not to go to this rally. And that's as much as he could do. He could have got a court order, as they did in New South Wales, then it got overturned. And New South Wales got a court order against, I think it's tonight's rally, but it won't make a difference. They'll turn up, so what? They'll all be in contempt of court. They're going to arrest them all and put them all in jail. It's one of these problems you've got where, I'm going to call them this, these well-intentioned idiots get out there and they do things saying, we are going with a single mind of representing our views. We're entitled to do it without reflecting on the fact that national leaders are saying, please think of the rest of the country and the health and the economic consequences if something goes wrong. Now, look, we don't know what the impact might be. They say they wore masks. Excuse me. My video of what the news clips showed an awful lot of people that weren't wearing masks, and that troubles me, because that's the sort of problem you've got. And well, we just have to wait and see what the impact is.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Graham. There's no further questions. If they do, I'll revert back to you. But that was great insight of how you see the market and optimistic view on it. So thank you very much and appreciate your support through this. We'll move straight on and we'll go to our next keynote speaker is Marie McCabe. Marie is the Chief Executive Officer of Dementia Australia. And if you've never heard Marie speak before, you'll be in for a passionate talk about the dementia. Whenever we have events, we kind of roll Marie out. She's kind of on our speaker circuit a little bit, but she's a fantastic lady. You couldn't get a better advocate to represent dementia in Australia, if not across the world. She's fantastic. Just a couple of stats. Marie's a member of a number of Commonwealth and international health and aged care sectors and committees and boards. Marie's a member of Alzheimer's Disease International Asia Pacific Regional Committee and chair of Alzheimer's Disease International Nominations Committee. She's a recognised leader in the health and aged care sector. Marie brings extensive experience across the health, mental health and aged care sectors in her current role. And to boot it all, she's a fantastic lady as well. So I'm going to hand over to Marie, and I can guarantee this will be exciting 20 minutes, I would have thought. Over to you, Marie. And
Thank you,
you'll have to leave her alone for the next 20 minutes, okay?
You better mute him, Jeff. It's the only way we'll guarantee it. Thank you so much. And let me start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we're meeting, and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. And I'd like to acknowledge my fellow speakers. For many people, for those of you who don't know, Dementia Australia is the peak body. We provide services, support and advocacy for people of all ages living with all forms of dementia, their families and their carers in Australia. And we're also the leading national provider of dementia education. Now, I just want to give you a bit of a background regarding prevalence data. So right now in Australia, we've got around 460,000 Australians living with dementia, and it is the second leading cause of death in Australia and the leading cause of death of women. And we also have around 1.6 million people involved in the care of people living with dementia in Australia. Every day, there's an estimated 250 people that join the population with dementia. Now, more than 50% of people living in residential care have a diagnosis of dementia. We know that more people have it than are diagnosed, and others will develop it during their time there. But what many people don't know is that around 70% of people with dementia actually live in the community. And COVID-19 has certainly had a significant impact on people in residential care and also people in the community, and also on our organisation. So it's absolutely changed the way that we operate, and we've had to modify our service, all of our services, and most of our services are now being delivered online. The well-being of our community, including people living with dementia, their families and their carers, has been our absolute priority. And we've implemented our pandemic management plan and certainly followed the situation closely. And as a national organisation, there are variations across the country as to how states and territories are responding. And so there are different regulations that we're required to adhere to depending on the location. And I meet twice a week with the Minister and with the Department of Health, and I have other meetings with PEACS as well. And it's certainly a situation that initially was changing rapidly. It required organisations to be agile, and it required a rapid response. And some of the things that we did, we immediately cancelled events. And we had the first event that was cancelled was with Sir Jackie Stewart. He was here for the Grand Prix, and we have a relationship with Sir Jackie's organisation, and they're called Race Against Dementia. And Sir Jackie raises funds. He speaks publicly about his wife who lives with dementia, and he has a very passionate interest in dementia and in finding a cure. But that was the first event that that was cancelled. And then the second one, we were right in the middle of our Memory Walk and Jog season. And we had Memory Walk and Jog signed up for, we had Ballarat the following day. ITA was attending that, and we had one every weekend thereafter. They were all cancelled. And I have to say our fundraising team were amazing, and they transitioned those to be online. And we've had 7,000 people across the country continue to participate virtually, which I think is just amazing and really speaks to the generosity of the Australian population in really finding other ways to support organisations that rely heavily on donations and government funding. The other things that we did was we immediately had all of our staff transition to work at home, and that was quite an undertaking with 600 staff across the country. But we also, as I mentioned earlier, transitioned some of our programs to deliver them online. Now, that's not easy when you're working with people living with dementia, and for many people that has worked very well. And for others, it's not worked so well. But the one thing I do want to emphasise here is the impact on carers. And Graham mentioned before, some of the challenges of isolation. And in the world of people living with dementia, that's their experience most of the time. But some of those carers, they had appointments for dialysis, for chemotherapy, for other medical conditions. So we continue to do face-to-face in-home respite, particularly for those people, because it's essential to ensure that carers are well supported so that they can continue to support their loved one. Now, bearing in mind that the majority of people living with dementia are over the age of 65, some of these carers are in their 80s and their 90s caring, and they have their own chronic conditions, caring for a loved one living with dementia who has other chronic conditions as well. So support for carers is absolutely essential. Our National Dementia Helpline has continued to operate as usual, and our website and social media sites have been updated regularly to provide people with the most up-to-date information. And I have to say these changes have been very positively received, and we had a carer recently attend one of our education Zoom sessions. She was in her 90s and she was thrilled to be able to get the technology to work, and she couldn't wait to tell her friends that she's now figured out a way to continue their book club. So there have certainly been some very inspiring stories that have come out of it. And, where online and telephone support's an option, we do that. But, and we're certainly looking at continuing support programs online or via phone in future. Now, some services and activities, as I mentioned, have had to be postponed, and that's, we've done that and looked at other ways as to how we can deliver them. And during the pandemic, Dementia Australia has called on the community, including health and aged care staff, to work together to maintain engagement with people impacted by dementia. And I actually, as you know, they are some of the most vulnerable people in our community. And we've been ramping up our focus on engagement and communication at this time of restricted physical contact. And it is especially important for people living with dementia. Some of the unintended consequences for people living with dementia. There was a presentation recently by Dr. Sandra South from the Australian Association of Gerontology, and her research shows that there's been an increased rate of progression of dementia symptoms due to the impact of lockdown and the lack of interaction and the loss of routine. And these are some of the unintended consequences of COVID-19 restrictions and enforcing isolation. And what we know for people living with dementia is if you reduce stimulus, it actually is likely to result in cognitive decline. Now, for those people, they're not going to regain that. That can't be restored. For people in the community living with dementia that were once functioning quite independently, one of the unintended consequences has been that unfortunately they've lost confidence now about going out, and they've lost function. And what's predictable will be premature entry into aged care, and unfortunately it will mean that there's a higher level of dependence. One of our clients, she shared about that watching her loved one's cognitive abilities slip away more quickly has been a profound concern for families. And it is something that is really concerning and something that we really do need to be mindful of. And it's the other part of that is that we have We've had some providers in residential care doing some amazing work, really amazing work, and facilitating visits for people and, you know, doing everything they can, even when they're in lockdown, to make sure that there's phone access or video access. And there are other areas, other homes where then people are not getting access. And we've had family members who have not been able to be present when their loved one dies. There have been instances where family members have not even been told that their loved one is dying, and they've just got a call to say, look, I'm sorry, you know, your mother or father has died. And there have been some very devastating impacts of COVID, and something I think that we as a community really need to band together and ensure that we remain in the community, engaging people living with dementia, their families and their carers. Some of the really inspiring things that we've heard of, there have been window visits that have been scheduled in residential care homes when places have been in lockdown. There have been, people have been engaging in virtual reality tours to museums. They've been doing some extraordinary things. And they're the sorts of things that it's fabulous to be able to profile and to really acknowledge the providers that have been going above and beyond to make sure that people retain their cognitive abilities by ensuring that there's cognitive stimulation and enjoyment, really, for people. So we've been looking at how do we as an organisation support the residential aged care and home and community sector. And we developed some tip sheets, and the tip sheets are all about things that have happened in other countries that have been dealing with COVID and the things that worked and didn't work there. So we've developed those into short tip sheets, and we've had thousands of downloads of those sheets. We've also been doing videos for people so that we can address some of the challenges that they might be, you know, challenged by on a day-to-day basis. And in working with people living with dementia, we've had about 39,000 views of those videos, which has been really great. But, you know, we're really working to ensure that we support the aged care industry in whatever way we can and in whatever way makes a difference to people living with dementia. The other thing that we've launched recently is our Keep the World Open campaign, and it's a campaign that invites members of the public to make a pledge to keep the world open for people living with dementia by understanding more about dementia and helping end discrimination. And you may have seen some of the ads that have been on recently, and I have to say the first time I saw it, I thought it was incredibly confronting, and I thought, great, we've hit the mark. That's the campaign that we need to launch. Now, I know it's too early to predict when the pandemic will end, but we're certainly looking at what people will need after this. I mean, we've reviewed our own strategic direction, and it's one of the things that we've found that, you know, has held us in very good stead over this period of time. We did a survey recently and found that about the impact on carers, 81% of carers said their mental health had deteriorated since COVID-19. And I'm sure it's not just carers, I know it's across the board, but having to deal with a loved one with dementia, caring for them in isolation and not being able to tap into the usual supports that are available certainly adds added stress. And about 88% of carers said they'd experienced increased stress in their role as a carer, with over half responding that their stress had increased by an extreme amount. Now, concerns about mental health, I know, are mirrored in feedback from Dementia Australia stakeholders, including people living with dementia, families and carers across the board. And we know that social isolation can lead to depression and anxiety. So it's certainly something that we have put a great deal of focus on during this period of time, as has the government. There's been a significant allocation of funds to the mental health sector around this, and I think that's really important. I mentioned earlier that we've reviewed our strategic direction called Designing a New Future, and that we have 3 priority areas: timely diagnosis and support, quality care, and reducing stigma. Now, these certainly have not changed during the COVID pandemic, and it's reinforced to us that these priorities now more than ever are exactly what Dementia Australia needs to be focused on. And one of the initiatives involves the capacity of building dementia practice leaders from aged care organisations across the countries, allowing for ideas and innovation in dementia care. And technology has been a vital component in supporting this community. So the Centre for Dementia Learning at Dementia Australia offers a wide range of programs. We've had over 500 people participate in the dementia practice program, and we're using virtual technology to maintain engagement and to reach those who are more isolated. Our technology includes the Enabling Eddie program, and that's an immersive program that enables people to see the world through the eyes of somebody living with dementia. We recently launched A Day in the Life, and it's a mealtime experience, and we launched that in December. Now, that workshop enables you to see the world through the eyes of the person living with dementia and their carer. And that part has been a real breakthrough, I have to say, because you see the experience from both sides, and you can absolutely get very present to where breakdowns occur in the care of somebody living with dementia. Certainly, we're now working on TED, an avatar, and TED is an interactive character that the amazing thing about TED is he can actually engage with aged care workers as the person living with dementia. And I have to say that this is a real breakthrough, both in technology, and it will certainly add another element that is quite profound to the experience of people who participate in this education. But certainly by focusing on innovative strategies, by working together, we really can create positive experiences for people living with dementia, their families and their carers. And thank you so much for your time today. And Jeff, thank you for the opportunity to be part of this.
Thanks, Marie. I do have a couple of questions for you, Marie. The first question is, aged care operators used to get a dementia supplement to assist with caring dementia residents.
Yeah.
This was moved somewhat swiftly with little announcement. In your discussions with government, can you see the dementia supplement being reinstated in the future?
Great question. The supplement hasn't been discussed, but I know that the government has certainly increased funding to aged care providers during the pandemic. But I think that acknowledging the increased care needs of people living with dementia is something that we absolutely need to consider. Now, if we look at things from a person-centred approach, whether somebody has got dementia or they've got another complex health condition, there needs to be a way of funding for the complexity that is over and above what you would normally expect somebody in residential aged care to require.
Yeah. A question from me. I know, when you, in retrospect, the efforts that Marie and your team do, but there is a significant component that you do rely on donations and events to create income for you. How have you, and certainly that Jackie, your walks and your Jackie Gleason event would have raised a certain amount of funds for you. Are you being subsidising the government for that at all?
No.
No,
we're not. So we're looking at other ways, Jeff, of raising money. And as I said earlier, the fundraising team, they did our memory walk and jog in a virtual way, and they did an amazing job. So we're continuing with all our fundraising activities in other ways. And and this is a tough time for people in the community, and we acknowledge that. So we're always looking at ways of introducing income generating ideas and the opportunity for fee for service, which is also part of the work that we do at Dementia Australia.
And one last question from me. You mentioned on technology where you had to be innovative to obviously get to whether you have people living in residential care or still in home care with social isolation. What technologies did you find worked better and which ones didn't, without putting you on the spot, I suppose?
Yeah, look, I've got to say, Zoom has been incredible. It's worked incredibly well. There are remote communities that don't have network capability, and that's a real issue. There's a place that in Northern Territory that our staff visit. It takes 3 days to get there, and it's only accessible 5 months of the year, and they don't have technology. So, technology is great where people can access it, but where it doesn't work is in relation to people that have visual or hearing impairments. It can be challenging there. And if they have advanced dementia and they don't have a carer that can work with them to do that. But I have to say that Zoom has been, that's been the platform that we've used the most, and phone. Yeah, they're the two technology things that we've used most in terms of pivoting our business to online. Yeah.
Terrific. There's no further questions, Marie. So thanks so much again. Inspiring speech, and the statistics just, you roll out these statistics. It's just so alarming when you hear it, and people living with dementia and how they go about it. So, and Dementia Australia and yourself, led by you, do a fantastic job. So congratulations on what you do.
Thank you so much, Jeff.
Okay, moving on. Our third speaker is Graham Croft. Graham is the founder of Signature Care and Croft Developments. Graham's been involved in the aged care sector for over 35 years. Graham is a serial entrepreneur and an extremely successful businessman. And on that last bit, the first time I met Graham, I was actually I met him over a beer at the Half Moon, and it was with Rob Hutchison from Mackenzie Aged Care. It included John Knowles from Art Care, included Graham, and included Regis. So if you ever wanted to understand what's happening in the aged care sector, I urge you, when it does reopen, to pop down there on a Friday night between 5 and 7, because they dominate the aged care sector down there. And on top of it, again, Graham's a fantastic ally and a great contributor to our community. So over to you, Graham.
Great, thanks, Jeff. And look, I certainly enjoyed the presentations of both Graham and Marie. And Marie, just picking up on a couple of your statistics, the 500,000 odd people with dementia. Of course, aged care stock only has about 200,000 aged care beds. So the ability of the community to care for people with dementia in the community is incredibly important. Just going to the COVID-19 situation, there've been 29% of all the deaths that have occurred in Australia with COVID-19 have occurred in aged care facilities. Of course, we're all aware of Newmarch House, which is now subject to a separate inquiry by government. 19 deaths there. And it was interesting reading the comments by the CEO of that organisation, who said that one of the things that they should have done earlier was move people out to public hospitals earlier. So I think the takeaway that I see out of the COVID-19 situation for aged care has been that you must isolate early, you must act quickly, remove the person from the facility, test and test again, continually test over perhaps a period of 21 to 28 days. But more importantly, what's occurring is the situation of facilities locking down, and that's gone through a great deal of complaint from the wider community. But shutting down facilities is not new in the aged care sector. Most of the operators that are in this sector would be well aware that they need to shut down in cases of gastro. And look, it would be very few facilities that haven't had cases of gastro where they do shut down the facility. By shut down, I mean ban visitors and non-essential visitors, and certainly be checking of staff and all of those sort of things. So I think the aged care sector is, by and large, very savvy about infection control, controlling gastro and the like. And I think this situation of COVID-19 has just stretched it a little bit more. What I do think is coming out of the COVID-19 situation is the way that aged care providers have communicated with resident families. And I think that's been generally fairly poor. And the complaints that I saw on television really came about because people weren't being kept up to date with what was occurring. And generally, when I look at the COVID-19 situation, the Aged Care Royal Commission, which has been on hold for a little while now, while this situation has been ongoing, there's some similarities that have occurred out of this with COVID-19 and also the Aged Care Royal Commission, and it amounts to residents' families not being kept up to date or sufficiently up to date. And our organisation has recently been going through looking at care management systems, computerised care management systems for the next wave of our expansion. And I have to say that I've been relatively disappointed in the ability of those computerised care planning systems to, in fact, offer apps that are available to resident families and the like. And I have grandchildren now, and the fortunate thing is that I'm seeing, by virtue of comments that I made by my daughter, who says to me, "Hey, look what's going on in childcare today." And on the app on her phone, she gets reports each day about her son or her daughter, about what they're doing, how they've gone, whether they've had an injury or anything there, and whether they've got a scratch on their face or anything else. Truly, this sort of communication is what needs to happen in aged care, and I think that we'll move towards that, where we're communicating with families via apps on a daily basis, as opposed to making a phone call every now and then, getting them in for a care consult and what have you. I think we need to be better at it, and I think we can look at the childcare sector as being a leader in that, in terms of that communication. And of course, the difference is that aged care is not in as much of a competitive situation as childcare. So childcare operators work in a much more competitive environment. They have in fact been very well supported by the Commonwealth Government with COVID-19, although that's due to come to an end. Looking at where I think the aged care sector is going to go, I think we're about to see maybe some positive changes. Federal government's looking at registering all staff, which I think will be a good thing. I think providers need to be looking at their quality of their permanent staffing, removing access to agency workers, and the issues with COVID-19 and some of those workers at places like Newmarch House. They were provided by labour hire sectors, and the disadvantage of that, of course, is those people are moving from home to home to home, and the same thing with gastro outbreaks. If those workers move from provider to provider, you're getting that carryover of all of those issues. So I think permanent staffing is the key. 100% permanent staffing is something aged care operators should aim for. Coming out of what we can learn out of this current environment is that I think we need to be A, more savvy about communication, but B, I think we need to be taking matters into our own hands in terms of temperature testing residents, the families and visitors and our staff on an ongoing basis. And I'm even advocating looking at the possibility that we can do that via shutdown doors. So when you go into the lobby of an aged care facility, you go through sliding doors, that if there's a temperature tester there, it may not in fact let you go into that facility if you've got a high temperature. I think all of these things will be up for grabs coming forward, and I think providers need to be looking at it. IT, generally, I would say with an aged care is going to undergo a significant change. We need to do it. We need to do it in a more savvy way. We build aged care facilities from scratch, so we have the advantage of looking at all the current IT systems and what we need to put into facilities. But also I'm seeing that the abilities of carers to communicate in real time with tablets and what have you, this is only going to increase, and there needs to be more of a rollout, more of a commitment to IT, residents having smart TVs in their rooms that will communicate things about activity programs and all the rest of it. And our new facilities now, the IT spend has probably gone up by about 250% in the last 12 months. And that's directly as a result of all the Wi-Fi enablement that we need to provide to run these types of systems. Of course, the aged care sector has had its issues with funding. Between 2014 and 2018 financial years, there was a 9% drop in real funding. And what I mean by that drop is that the aged care sector was funded under its ACFI. But if we look at the raw numbers of ACFI versus the raw numbers of the cost of staffing under the Modern Award, which in fact is probably less than most providers would experience, because most providers do have they do have EBAs, but the minimum they would have experienced over that time is a 9% drop in funding. Now, workforce contributes about, it costs about 70% of available income. That's generally the industry benchmark, somewhere between 68 and 70%. So you can see that a drop in that funding means that there's less availability of staff to go around. And I believe that this has contributed to some of the situations with the complaints to the Aged Care Royal Commission. And that's going to be, I think, something that will come forward in terms of what aged care facilities are going to be viable over the longer term. In terms of bed sizes or facility size, I think anything less than about 90 beds now is probably just marginal. What's occurring in the industry is there's a big demand for private space by residents. They're no longer happy with shared rooms, and I totally get that. The private space that people are looking at, they're looking at minimum bedroom sizes of 16 odd metres, en suites, separate lounge dining, activity areas and the like. And look, the facilities that we're seeing being built these days are somewhere around about the 60 to 65 square metres per resident. So, you know, these facilities are getting bigger, they're offering more amenity, and look, we generally produce facilities that go into sometimes regional or out of metropolitan areas as the growth areas. And when a new facility is built, it gets the lion's share of admissions. So these facilities will generally be filled within 9 to 12 months. The difficulty is that the older facilities that were once guaranteed occupancy by virtue of the fact there was no competition. Competition is here, and I think that the operators need to consider within the next 5 years, you're going to have probably unlimited competition. Government will look at, I think, uncapping the aged care bed licences. That's going to look at the fact that, you know, as we've just seen a proliferation in with childcare facilities and brand new facilities being built, offering greater and better amenities for childcare. The same thing is going to occur with aged care. So I think that there's changes afoot. I think that people are operating old facilities that have had very little upgrading. I think they need to consider whether they should, in fact, invest in upgrading or, in fact, rebuild. I think also the next challenging part of things are going to be the integration of primary health, certainly medical facilities, diagnostics. A lot of aged care providers now are looking at wellness centres in their facilities, so mini gyms, virtual reality experience. So we've seen, Jeff, at some of your presentations that you had with, you know, the virtual reality situations of people with dementia. But even some of the more things that we take for granted in the communities, such as cafes and the connection with locals in the community. And we've built we've built a number of facilities in Cairns. I think we've built 5 facilities up there. And what was pleasing to see was locals in the community coming in to use the cafe, even though they didn't have a connection with any relatives there, but they just liked the environment. And there was a playground there as well, so children could come and play on that playground and they'd enjoy the cafe. So I think the big key thing now for aged care facility is be relevant to the community. I think communicate to the families and be better at communicating. Those that are offering IT solutions need to be looking at that. Previously, IT solutions were all about funding. You know, did you maximise your ACFI funding? Did you have you kept all the right information for the aged care assessors? And I think that is going to change to the point that, or certainly be expanded, so that the actual communication that we give to residents' families will be via apps, will be in real time, and I think that'll reduce the number of resident complaints and make resident families feel more connected to the facility and to their loved ones. I can't probably add much more to that, but happy to take any questions.
Graham, you have raised one question from the floor, which when you mentioned the temperature reading when you enter a facility, I could probably support that as well. We've released a product that will measure the temperature as you enter into aged care. Now, we won't release the doors open unless you get that proper reading. Once you're in, you'll have a signing process where you'll ask 4 or 5 impertinent questions in relation to it. So I can see where the automation of that is going to take away from the human side of it, but it's the most important side to ensure that, you know, our loved ones are still protected in when it is, whether it's lockdown or part their lockdown. So it's a very good point that you raised there.
Thanks, Jeff.
Secondly, going forward, Graham, you have recently been, if you don't mind me saying this, that you have been building the development sites, and now you've become an operator, or becoming an operator, I think, in the coming months. How have you seen that, even though you've done it before, how have you seen that transition working from your organisation?
It's somewhat frustrating, I have to say. Frustrating at the number of IT providers out there. Some have had a good progression on systems. I just think at the moment there's so many diverse systems out there that don't talk to one another. You haven't got payroll talking to various aspects. You've got there's new providers coming through. I'm just seeing a mismatch of stuff in IT. It's pretty frustrating, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Okay, Graham, thanks so much. That was great insight. It was very diverse what you talked about. Really good stats. Really appreciate your support on it. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Okay, and lastly, moving on, we're on track as well, which is good. Our final speaker is is my new boss, actually. Sol Lukatsky is the Managing Director of Spirit Telecom. Sol has got an extremely strategic mindset. He's looking at building this business up to be a major telco and IT MSP in Australia over the coming, I would say, over the next 12 to 18 months. His structure, his strategy is rock solid. He is our boss, so be very nice and kind to him. And I'll hand over to Sol. Thank you, Sol.
Thanks, Jeff, and good afternoon, everybody. That was very, very kind and genuine. There was no lies in that whatsoever. So thank you, Jeff. Thank you. Look, first of all, I just want to acknowledge the speakers on the call today. Graham Croft, Graham Samuel, obviously Marie McCabe as well. And maybe I'm the corporate capitalist in the room, but I just want to take a minute to thank all three of you for the contribution that you make to the community. So I just want to acknowledge you and thank you for that, because sometimes corporate Australia forgets the contribution that you make, not just to people with dementia or the elderly or the senior citizens, but what the individual contributions that you make and the sacrifice that you do. So from corporate Australia, I just want to acknowledge that and thank you very much. We're very grateful. And obviously Graham is a client and Murray is a client as well. So very grateful for your support. Spirit and Trident, who are we and what do we do? Spirit is an ASX listed small cap company. It's about a 90 mil market capitalisation. The rationale for I guess, approaching Katie and Jeff in terms of their business is very simple, actually. And Graham provided the example before. So what we can do today is we have our own high-speed internet network, which we do through fixed wireless technology through the air or through fibre. Now what we can do is take that high-speed internet and connect that to a network in an aged care centre. And we also have the managed Wi-Fi products. So no longer does the organisation, be they an aged care provider or hospital, have to rely on just one or two network providers. We can do that all the way through the product set. So if you're thinking about high-speed internet, if you're thinking about redundant links, you're thinking about cloud-based technologies, the infrastructure and the quality of people behind that, we can now offer that end-to-end on one bill. We can do it with one service level agreement. But the piece that I will acknowledge as well, yes, we are a small ASX company, but you still get access to myself if you want it. You still get access to Jeff and Katie. So we offer old-fashioned service backed by an ASX listed organisation as well. So I'm not going to take too much more time. Once again, I do want to acknowledge Graham Croft, Graham Samuel and Marie for your contribution today. In all seriousness, with Jeff and Katie, I think we all agree we're getting along very well, and that's an important thing to say. In all seriousness, I work for you, Jeff. You're a large shareholder, so I'm just a mere employee for you. So, and also just want to acknowledge Gavin, who's done an enormous amount of hard work, and Kate Hawker, who is the technology expert in the background making this all possible. So thank you very much, and I'll hand back to Jeff.
Thanks very much, Sol. And as I like to say, there's a lot of soul in spirit. Okay, there is one question that's come from, and I will acknowledge this person. Craig Holland is one of the owners of Bedrock Aged Care Centre. Extremely talented golfer and a Richmond supporter. But Craig's got another question for Graham. The media, especially ABC, has a negative view of the aged care sector. If it is never portrayed in a positive light despite the magnificent work the sector does. Unfortunately, the general public will take this as being the truth when the reality is far different. How do we as an industry assist in changing the public perception of aged care? And that could be both Grahams. I'll start with Graham Croft, and then, natural fact, I'll go to all three of you. I'll start with Crofty. You go first.
Oh, look, Craig, that's a real challenge, that question. Look, being in this sector since 1984, I don't think we ever hear really anything truly positive about the sector. And reality is that nobody wakes up one day and says, or wakes up in the morning and says, oh, today I'm going to go and live in an aged care facility. They go there at a time when most families have exhausted all other opportunities to care for their relative at home, and so therefore aged care is a last resort. So most people go into it from the point of view of, or most families do it from the point of view of a bit of guilt too, that they can't really look after people at home. And look, unfortunately, I think there's been some situations with aged care providers that they haven't done the right thing. But look, the large sector of the community do a very, very good job. And I think that I think we need to be better at promoting ourselves within the community. And I think that can occur via things that go on your own websites, that go on, I mean, local papers are pretty much a thing of the past now, but when there's an opportunity of something that might have a community interest, send it on to the media, put stuff on Twitter or Facebook or whatever it is, create your own positive images that can be shared by people. So whatever they are, I think share the positive, and hopefully that drains out the negative. I'm not sure whether anybody else has any thoughts on that, but that would be my only suggestion.
Thanks, Graham. Graham, did you want to comment at all? Graham Samuel?
Look, yeah, the ABC and other media outlets have been negative, but that's because there have been some very negative stories to tell for it, unfortunately. There's been some horrific treatment of aged care persons in some organisations and or in some facilities, and that's come out during the Royal Commission. As Marie knows, I was pretty disappointed, no, angry is the word, when the Royal Commission was called, because it is simply drawing out again what we've always known and what has been around for so long it doesn't matter, and the remedies have been there and have been available, but they've never been taken up by government. They've been in the David Tune report of 2012, very little of which was taken up in the report that Kate Carnell and others prepared in respect of Oakton, and very little of that was taken up. So what's the answer? Graham has talked about doing your website, not your website, your Twitters and all this to tell the good news. No, you need more than that. You actually need some real transparency as to what is going on in aged care facilities run by your organisation. Now, let me say this, and I'll put this challenge out, so I do this once again, and maybe Graham Croft can carry it back to his industry and the like. Of 3,500 aged care facilities in this country, to the best of my knowledge, there is not a single one that either has the courage or the honesty to have a website that says, these are the complaints we've received, and these are the bouquets we've received. And this is the truth about our facility. Now, there was one organisation that got hammered because of a particular incident that arose at one of its facilities. And the CEO is a good friend of mine, and he rang me and he said, what do I do? I said, mate, be the first one of all the big boys to go out there and create a website that sets out all your complaints and all your praise. In other words, a bit like a TripAdvisor, Excuse me. And he said, good idea. And he spoke to his chair, and the chair said, good idea. And then they fired the CEO. They didn't think it was a good idea, and they didn't proceed with it. But there is no one that actually does just that. And I don't understand why. It seems to me to be a competitive advantage for a particular organisation, be it Graham's one or whoever it might be, to go out there and to say, we are going to tell you the honest truth about the way we operate, because we're going to have a website where it can all be laid out there. Now, very interestingly, until more recently, when Ray Lamb was the Aged Care Complaints Commissioner, she admitted on TV that they never put a complaint on their website. And she said there were privacy concerns. Well, a lot of rubbish, frankly. I've never heard so much nonsense in my life. Privacy concerns. There's no privacy issues when you are talking about an organisation, ABC Limited, I say ABC, the XYZ Limited, doesn't matter, right? And you publish on that website complaints received, and maybe you wait until they've been verified, and you say complaints received and verified. I actually like to see a bit of a timeline for your Aged Care Complaints Commissioner. It's now the Aged Care Quality and Safety Commissioner, I think, combined. But to see a website that actually talks about how long it's taken them to investigate complaints and either to dismiss them or to verify them has been the case. But we have no transparency. We have very little transparency in health across Australia, frankly, Jeff. And you and I have talked a bit about this, and some proposals that I've got going before the federal government to provide more transparency. In my days of 8 years with the ACCC, there is nothing more powerful than consumers being properly informed and being able to say, yeah, that is a good healthcare provider and that is a bad one. And I won't go to the bad one, and I won't go to the one that's not prepared to disclose how good or bad they are, because they must have something to hide. And that way, the worst providers, they fall by the wayside and they fail, and the better ones rise to the surface. That's what consumer empowerment is about. And that's, frankly, I think, is how you deal with these things. You end up with two results. First of all, the truth comes out, but secondly, more importantly, the negative stories that are there, and they'll always appear, whether it's ABC or Current Affair or Channel 9 News, whatever it is, they'll be neutralised by being able to say, no, there's the truth. That's what it's all about.
Thanks, guys. Marie, did you want to say anything at all?
Yeah, I do actually. One of the things I think has been a challenge has been the punitive approach to aged care over a number of years. And I think, the historical approach to relating to that all providers are bad is a real disappointment, because they're not. And I think we've seen some absolutely amazing work done by many providers during COVID. And I think that's been an opportunity for the industry to really raise the flag about, we have had so few deaths in comparison to the UK, which has had up to 25,000. And we've had providers doing some really innovative things. And Graham Croft, I really like what you said before about innovation and using apps for families to communicate. And I think there's a lot to be said about that. I don't think the industry is viewed as particularly innovative. It has been, what's happened in the past is because of the focus on compliance, I think it's thwarted innovation. And I think that is a real concern for the industry. And I think to be able to do things that now show the innovation that's there in the industry and the great examples of some of the fantastic care that people get is really important. I also agree with Graham Samuel in the transparency. And the reason I agree with that is because years ago when I worked in the private hospital sector, there was a review of the sector and we started to look at how could we improve the care that was delivered. There were some sentinel events that were happening. There were some significant concerns around accreditation and some of the high priority recommendations that places were getting. And the sector really came together looking at how do we turn this around and how do we use these experiences as opportunities for learning, for developing, for building capacity of our staff, for building the quality of care and making sure that people get the best care possible. And I think that there are some really good examples and good lessons that we could adopt from when the private hospital sector came together. There was a rationalisation of the sector. We've seen that in aged care over the recent years where small providers, it's obviously not viable for many small providers to continue. So I think there are some really important lessons there. But I think over the time of COVID, there is, you know, there's been some shining examples of really great work in the industry.
Terrific. Thanks so much for
I'll just make
your
one other
insight.
quick comment.
Three key speakers. So I would like to echo. Graham, did you want to say?
Yeah, just a very quick one. I will guarantee you what the Royal Commission will do is say we need to improve the ratio of registered nurses, et cetera, right? It's always a numbers game. And as I keep on saying to people, it's all very well having your ratios of registered nurses, but heaven help us if all those registered nurses are nurse ratchet, you know, from one floor over the cuckoo's nest. This is a cultural issue. It's an issue of those at aged care facilities having tender, loving care for those that they're caring for. Now, my dear 99 and 11 months mother-in-law is in an aged care facility. She gets the most wonderful care. And I agree with Marie, the vast majority of those aged care facilities provide the most wonderful care. But that is because the culture of the people there is of tenderness, of loving, of caring, of wanting to make sure that this dear old person is going to get all the care that she deserves, along with everyone else there, right? But it does require that culture. It's not a question of ratios. Ratios are important, but it's not the be-all and end-all. It happens to be the simplistic model that too often these groups take, and it's part of the easy calculable model that, and if you like, the ex post punitive model that Marie talks about. So if we can get those things right, and that's where I think transparency is ultimately really important and really powerful.
Yep, well said. Okay, I'd just like to echo Sol's comments about our three keynote speakers. As you can see, and as the feedback from the questions and so forth, very insightful, very topical, and a great contribution. So thank you, Graham Croft, Graham Samuel, and Marie McCabe. Obviously, Gav for the introduction, and of course Kate Hawker at the back end. If I don't thank Kate, I'm a dead man. We will be following up the next event. It may be Zoom, but it could be View to Model, it could be Supernormal. We don't know yet. That's the times that we live in at the moment. But we're all adapting to this new lifestyle, and as you can see, we're all adapting it quite well. We will be sending a survey, and we will be doing a recording. And if you have problems downloading that recording, then give us a call, because we've got some really good fast internet speed that'll help you through that. So thanks again for a great conference forum. Enjoy your weekend, and the footy is back. Go the Saints.
Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah.